Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. It's been a long few weeks, I know, whether it be with the quarantine or other anxieties that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And I've been unfortunately no stranger to these anxieties. It seems recently, whether it's one thing or another, something in my life just keeps messing up. So I do apologize on slowing down on uploads. I've been dealing with a lot of mental problems, such as my bipolar and anxiety, as well as just like a lot of physical problems. I recently started going to a chiropractor, and it's really been helping me. I got hurt right before I started doing YouTube back in the day, and I never actually ended up getting myself checked out and fixed. All these years later, I'm finally getting my shoulder fixed and my spine fixed, and it just turns out that it was much worse than we thought it was. So I am slowly recovering and doing the best I can to be able to put out content for you guys. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that I'm not just, trying to get away from YouTube content, but unfortunately, to get my health back into 100%, I have to slow down. I appreciate everybody, as always, who supports these videos, and I'm sorry if this is annoying you. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, you can share it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. Today I'm going to be reading some scary stories sent in by viewers as always. These stories are a bit different, and if you know this series already, you know they can be a bit more disturbing. These stories are revolving around the most scariest thing in my opinion on this planet Earth, and that is human beings. There seems to be nothing creepier and nothing more evil and twisted than a human being. A year ago, I was 28, living in a condo in southern Arizona. I am a single parent and have my 3 children and a dog, a Belgian Shepherd named Loki, living in this little quiet condo. This neighborhood that we lived in was actually quite nice and friendly. My children would play outside with neighbor kids on a daily basis. I didn't really have to watch them like a hawk out there. Plus, my neighbor had his garage open every day, all day, because he built race cars for a living, and watched the kids out there too as he was building. One fall night in 2016, I was doing my usual chores. Vacuuming, cleaning the rooms, washing clothes, etc. I wanted to do as much as I could before the kids got back from their grandparents' house the next morning. I have a door in my bedroom. That is a sliding glass door, and I usually leave it halfway open, so it'll be easier for me to go back and forth from the garage where the washing machine was, and for fresh air. Loki also loved it open because it was easy to access, to run back and forth inside and outside. He's a very obedient, smart, loyal family dog. Well, I needed to throw the trash away, and when Loki saw me getting the garbage bag, he knew I was about to head out to the alley, and he likes coming with me. So I went through my room, through my sliding glass door, and opened the garage to throw away the trash in the dumpster. When I was putting the dumpster's lid back down, I turned around and saw Loki. His eyes were fixed on the roof, and he was growling. I looked up to see what he was growling at, and I didn't see anything. Just assuming it was a cat because he absolutely despised cats. So I started walking back in the garage, and usually, I didn't have to say anything to Loki, he just followed. I was about to press the button where the garage door came down and realized Loki was still out in the alley. I called for him to come, but he didn't. He didn't even look my way. He was sitting, looking up, very still as if he were hunting something. "Loki, come!" I yelled. Then suddenly he jumped up and snarled and barked viciously towards the roof. At the same time he did, I heard thumps going across my roof. "What in the heck was that?" I yelled. What scared me the most was the way Loki reacted. I've only seen him like this maybe once before, and that is when I almost got robbed when I was stationed back in Washington at the time, years earlier. I quickly shut the garage door and went inside a little rattled. Loki, still a little wind up, kept pacing back and forth crying and growling. So I texted one of my neighbors who helped me a lot if he could please come to my house. Even though it was quite late, I didn't want to call the cops quite yet. And anyway, he was just 2 houses down from me. "Les, can you please come and check around my house? I think someone's trying to get in." He happened to be up and actually called me a minute later, so I explained the situation to him. He told me to wait inside while he checked, so Les went up on the roof and checked everything up there. He didn't find anything, not so much as even trash up there. It's probably just cats, not to worry, but if you hear anything again, call me and I'll check again. I said thank you and apologized for the inconvenience. The next couple of days go by and I heard nothing. It was all quiet, so I went on thinking I was just being paranoid. The next morning I was brushing my daughter's hair for school and heard very loud footsteps across my roof. It startled my daughter and Loki went crazy again, so I got my old military machete from under my bed and ran out to the back with Loki. Nothing. I circled around the front and there was nothing. If my neighbors saw me, they probably thought I was crazy walking around the early morning hours with a machete in my hand. So I went inside to reassure my daughter that it was probably a cat. She told me, "No, Mom, it sounds like someone was running." I told her, "It's okay, baby. It's gone now." Later that day, when I came from work, I saw police cars down the street in an ambulance. It was my neighbor Colleen. She was getting loaded up into an ambulance. Colleen was an older, very sweet lady. I walked pretty fast to the other neighbors and asked what was going on. Someone had broken into her house while she was napping, and Colleen apparently startled the assailant, and the asshole pushed a fragile neighbor to the wall, breaking her hip. The guy escaped. Colleen was there on the ground until her daughter came to check on her just a little while ago. She got worried that her mother Colleen wasn't answering the phone, and thank God she came and checked on her. I was just in awe, just trying to wrap my head around what happened. Then the police were talking to each one of us, asking if we saw or heard anything suspicious lately. Then I realized, holy crap, I knew those footsteps were on my roof. As I thought to myself, so I told the officers immediately everything that I heard and saw, and how Loki reacted. So the police set up officers to patrol our neighborhood for about a week and nothing really happened. I had to tell my daughters what was going on. My son is still kind of young to understand, so he doesn't really understand what a bad person is. But I did my best to explain that a bad person was trying to take things from us, and he said to me, "Don't worry, Mama, I'll make you safe." So I explained to them they couldn't play out as freely as they were for a while, until things calmed down. 2 weeks passed, still a little on guard. It was late and I needed to do laundry, so I had my sliding glass door open for the fresh air, and so it would be a bit easier for me to get in and out with loads of laundry. When I was getting my last load, I had the basket in my arms. I shut the door to the garage and was walking to my room. As I got under the porch, I took a step and then I heard a creak. For a minute, I paused and looked down, confused if I made that creak. I soon realized how stupid I was to even look down because my floor was made of concrete. Then I heard another creak. I slowly looked up and realized where it was coming from. It was coming from right above me on my porch roof. My heart sank. In my head, I was screaming profanities. I looked down because I saw movement, and out of nowhere Loki appeared, but he just sat at the doorway of my room. I very quietly motioned to him, "Loki, come." At first he started wagging his tail as if we were going to play. Then Loki stepped out, and as soon as he stepped out, his fur on the back of his head raised in defense mode. Then he started growling. He then walked out from under the porch and turned. He then snarled and ran inside. As I was sliding the door closed, I yelled, "Loki, come!" in a demanding loud voice so he would listen. He came running inside. I locked the door immediately. I saw a shadowy figure jump from my roof onto the floor. My oldest daughter came in and asked what was going on, and I told her to get my phone and call 911 immediately. I told my other daughter to get her brother and barricade themselves in the bathroom. Take Loki with you, and you don't open the door for no one unless it's me or the police. They were crying and wanted me to come. "Baby, I can't go. It'll be okay, just go." Loki was foaming at the mouth and wanting to get this guy. I absolutely was terrified, shaking. I've been to war and seen things, but when my children were in the crossfire of this horror story, this was different. When I turned back to see where he was, he literally was right in front of me outside the glass door, glaring at me. He was wearing a hooded sweater and had a crowbar in his hand. I started to remember my machete was right next to my nightstand right beside me. I didn't want him to know I had it yet. If he tried breaking in, I wanted to give him a surprise of his life. He then jiggled the handle to my door to open it. I asked him what the hell he wanted. He said, "Look, you and your kids don't have to get hurt. Let me in, let me take your TVs." I was like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen, asshole. My husband is coming home right now." He replied with a grin, "You don't have a husband." My stomach dropped. He was rattling my door and yelling, "Let me in," then hit my door with a crowbar, but it didn't shatter. My kids were yelling, crying hysterically. They opened the door and let Loki out. Loki came sprinting into the door, enraged. "I'm going to kill that freaking dog, then your kids, then you." He started hitting the door harder and harder. I ran to get my machete and yelled for him to come on. Then a glorious sight. An officer jumped the fence and told him to put his weapon down. The guy turned to the officer and the officer tased him. 4 squad cars came. I went to go get my kids. I opened the door. They were all rattled and come running towards me, giving me tight hugs. He was charged and sent to prison. My kids are still going to therapy but are getting better. I'm doing whatever I can to help my kids cope with everything. Loki is still with us and we love him very much. Loki was a big part of saving our lives as much as the cops were. I hope I never see the assailant again, and if I ever do, I don't know if I could hold back on what I would physically do to him. So my name is Colton. I'm a regular guy from a regular town, and I'm a family man. This year in March, the entire nation was going through a very unusual, odd, and what could be characterized as a downright scary time. I doubt that I need to go into what I'm talking about. I will just say that the word lockdown is no longer a term used for just prisons, even though that's kind of what it felt like at times. My story starts maybe 10 days into the initial lockdown order. Let me start by saying that I live in a very conservative state. We have very few restrictions on firearms or your ability to use them. Our state has what is commonly referred to as the castle doctrine, which in a nutshell means, if you are on my property and I deem you as a threat, I am within my rights to use deadly force to protect myself, my family, or my property. I will also mention that we have one of the lowest violent crime percentages in the nation, which is why I chose to raise my family here. The reason that I note the aforementioned information is to impress you on the feeling of safety I have felt here my entire life. Not being safe in my home, or even my town, has never crossed my mind. That is until about 3 weeks ago. So, it was a Friday night. I would say that it was any Friday night, but that was just not the case. After 9 p.m. there is nothing, and I mean nothing. Not a car, not a bike, no people, heck, no noise at all. It's almost like The Walking Dead minus the zombies. This particular night we had broken out the board games, and Clue was the decided upon game. About 25 minutes into the game, my 16-year-old son bumps my shoulder and asks me, "Hey Pop, did you hear that?" I replied, "Hear what?" He said that he heard something like a tapping, but between me, him, his 2 sisters, and Mom, there was quite a bit of talking and laughing. Our house is 2 stories. The family area is in the basement level, which is where we were. Upstairs is the front door and entry, and 3 of the bedrooms. Maybe 5 minutes later I hear the same sound that my son was talking about. He says, "See, there it is again." I told him that this time I heard it too, and that I would go up and have a look. I went up the stairs and started towards the front door when I heard a very loud knock. A pounding would be more accurate, on the front door. I stopped in my tracks. The upstairs lights are off and it's quite dark. I decide to peek through the blinds and see who the heck might be at my door. My front porch light was tripped, so I knew something was out there, but I could see nothing. I do have a security system that has a front door camera, so I retreated downstairs and grabbed my tablet to have a look at what triggered my light and pounded on my door. I went back 10 minutes to about the time my son first heard the noise. The light came on and the camera recorded the tapping sound, but there was nothing there. The light goes off after 60 seconds of no movement. A few moments later, the light again comes on and the system again recording the tapping, but still there was nothing. 3 minutes later, the system is activated again, and this time it's the pounding, and again there is nothing there. I thought maybe that there was an issue with the video, so I activated all 6 cameras and ran a diagnostic. Everything seemingly was running perfectly. My son asked me if he could try something. I said sure and handed over the tablet. He reminded me that these cameras have a night vision capability. He rewound the video on the first tape and used the night vision setting. 2 seconds before the light came on, the camera caught a disturbing image. It was a shape. It was almost transparent at first. It moved, seemingly without touching the ground. It moved very quickly and covered my 50-foot front walkway in only 2 seconds. My son asked me, "Seriously, Dad, what is that?" I told him I had no idea, but it does kind of look like a person. Now once the light comes on, the night vision feature no longer works. But once the thing is still at the door, it is undoubtedly still. Then after about 3 minutes or so, the light trips and you hear the tapping appear again. After another 4 minutes, the light comes on and the pounding is heard once more. I waited the 60 seconds, and when the light goes off, the thing was there, in the backyard looking through the window. By this time, my whole family is looking at the screen, when all of us realize that the window this thing was looking through is the window that is right in front of us. The girls were definitely agitated and scared, and I'm gonna be honest, I was a bit worried too. I gave the tab to my son and told him to keep an eye on it and let me know if it moves. I went and grabbed my Benelli 12 gauge and headed to the back door with my son close behind. I asked, "Is he still there?" He replied, "Yep." I told him to disengage the auto feature on the security lights so that when I opened the door, the lights wouldn't come on. I quickly opened the door, stepped outside, and looked to my left at the window. My son said, "Dad, he's looking at you." I yelled, "Who are you, and what do you want?" "It's moving towards us, Dad." Now, I'm not crazy, but when I realized I couldn't quite see where this guy was, or whatever this thing was, I freaked out. I'm not going to fire my weapon without knowing what I'm firing at, you know? With no visible target, that would just not be safe. Needless to say, I stepped back inside and closed the door real quickly. "It's at the door," he said. My wife was now down the hall, asking what in the heck is going on. All I could say was that I had no clue. Then once again the tapping started on the door. At this point all I could muster was, "You are trespassing, leave now." Then the automatic security lights came on. All of them. I whispered to my son, "I thought you turned those off." He replied that he thought he did too. And on the tablet it said the setting was still off. Yet all of them stayed on for at least a minute. When the lights went off, this guy or this thing or whatever was no longer at the door. None of the cameras could see it anymore. He was apparently gone. Needless to say, all 5 of us stayed up all night watching the cameras on the television and tabs. Once the sun came up, my girls went to sleep on the couch, but the rest of us just couldn't manage to do the same. I can't tell you how many times we have watched that 25 minutes of video feed over the last few weeks. None of us have slept very well since. I have no idea who was outside my house that night, but I don't think any of us ever felt quite as safe as we once did. I love listening to your videos and podcasts, and have always dreamed of being able to write a story with my own experience. My first submission is not my story, but instead a story from my parents. To start, both my parents and I have grown up in a small southeastern town in Kentucky. The landscape is quite rural, and the actual city seat only has one stoplight in it, even in 2019. For the most part, the area is peaceful, and it feels as if everyone knows each other. While this story doesn't involve the paranormal, it is extremely terrifying. A real-life nightmare, if you will. The story begins on September 18th, 1989 in the county's only high school. Both of my parents were teachers at this said school. My mother happened to be in her planning period and was sitting in her teacher's lounge with a few other personnel. Their planning was cut short when a fellow female teacher ran screaming immediately into the teacher's round, stating, "He's got a gun! He's got a gun!" Understandably, the teacher was too distressed to explain in detail and immediately ran screaming out of the lounge. Everyone immediately scrambled to escape or hide from the gunmen. My mother, a fellow teacher, and teacher's aide ran into a small closet and attempted to hide. The closet was tiny, and along with 3 small women currently occupying it, was also home to a fold-away bed. No matter how hard they tried to close the door, the bed kept getting in the way. They were afraid to open the door and shove the bed out, as it would be a dead giveaway that someone was in the closet. After the initial shock, things began to quiet down in the school. They could hear a few shots fired, but had no idea how close the gunfire was in proximity to them. They literally crammed like sardines in a hot closet, unsure when or if the shooter would come for them. Though they tried to remain silent, my mother did make a plea for their salvation, as it was almost certain they wouldn't make it out of the school alive. The time ticked away slowly, and after an hour of being in the closet, they began to hear footsteps. The footsteps were slowly coming down the hallway toward the room they were in. Soft sounds, clicking, as if someone was searching around the hallway. As they came closer, the footsteps stopped in the doorway of the teacher's lounge. It was almost as if they could feel a pair of eyes searching the room from top to bottom, looking for any sign of life. My mom and the other woman had their hands on the doorknob, trying to keep it closed as much as possible. They were almost certain this was the end. Suddenly, they heard the person walk away and enter a nearby bathroom. My father also had a free first block, so he was seated at his desk trying to catch up on grading student assignments. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise, which he said sounded like a large table falling over. He wondered at what the sound might be, but figured it was simply a table that had gotten knocked over or someone had dropped several textbooks. Unlike the teacher's lounge, my father's classroom was located upstairs in a smaller portion of the school. While he continued grading papers, he began to hear someone running down the hallway. It was a teacher that seemed to be searching through the classrooms. He stopped in the doorway and said, "One of the kids brought a gun and has taken hostages. We need to evacuate the other classmates immediately." My dad quickly said, "I'll take the right side of the hall and you take the left." They then set off running down the halls to notify teachers and students. However, most of the classrooms had already been emptied. They would find out later that many of the classrooms had heard the initial gunshots and realized instantly what the sound was. The first floor classrooms had tried to evacuate by either running to the far stairwell or jumping out the windows into the parking lot. The classroom doors had small windows in which you could see people passing outside. The classroom that was located across the gunfire had been too scared to exit into the hallway, at risk of being shot. The students were all jumping out of the windows in droves. The poor teacher was heavily pregnant, and the windows were quite narrow and only slanted slightly when they opened. It took a great deal of effort, but they got her out of the window. The students and teachers were scared for their life, not knowing if the shooter would suddenly barge into their room and begin shooting as they tried to exit. My dad eventually located a classroom that had not been evacuated. He ran over to the teacher and explained the situation. He then spoke to the students and told them, "You need to exit the school right now. Don't take your belongings. Don't go to the bathroom. Don't talk to anyone. As quietly as you can, take the far stairwell and don't look behind you. Go now." My dad is likely one of the most laid-back individuals you could ever meet. The students knew this and listened closely, knowing the situation was dire. Everyone rushed to the far stairwell, away from the gunmen, and exited to the bus garage. Dad said that the police arrived within minutes of them emptying the building and corralled everyone over to a funeral home that was across the road from the high school. Within 30 minutes, a SWAT team arrived and had set up a perimeter both inside and outside of the school. A family member had found out about the situation and called my grandfather, my mother's father. He had rushed to the school to check on his daughter and son-in-law. As my dad was waiting with the students in the funeral home parking lot, he began to search for my mother. My father asked one of the teachers that had been in the lounge with my mom if he had seen her. He said he thought she was outside. Dad once again searched through the crowd asking if anyone had seen my mother. By this time, my grandfather had arrived and asked my father where my mom was. He said that he couldn't find her. He again asked the teacher who had been in the lounge with her, and he said, "Well, come to think of it, I remember her saying that she might hide in the closet." Everyone was terrified of what might have happened to her, since it had been close to 3 hours since the gunmen had entered the building. My father and grandfather notified some of the Kentucky State Police that were on the scene. Under the watchful eyes of snipers located in the parking lot and on the roof, the KSP officers entered the school and headed for the closet they thought my mother was in. My mother said that she and the other woman could hear someone outside, and they almost died of fright. Without announcement, the doorknob was suddenly ripped from their hands, and light flooded into the closet. Not hearing a cacophony of gunfire, my mom looked up and realized there were two armed state troopers standing outside the closet. She said that it was probably the best sight in her entire life. There were no times for tears of joy, though. The officers told my mother and the other two women, "You're going to be okay, but we need to get you out of the building ASAP. We need you to rush down the hallway, and when you come into the lobby to exit, you need to run." After a count, my mother was ushered from teacher's lounge toward the high school lobby. She said when she rounded the corner, there were multiple snipers set up in the hall along with a .50 caliber machine gun pointed at the classroom where the shooter was. That day my mother had worn a dress and heels, and she said she could remember trying to run across the grass in her heels getting stuck in the soil. She kept running through until she joined the others in the funeral home parking lot. The initial takeover had begun around 9:50 a.m. during the first block of classes. The shooter had entered the school with 3 guns, 1 shotgun, a .357 pistol, and a .44 caliber Magnum, and walked into his first block class. Upon entering the classroom, he shot into the ceiling through the art classroom located above. Luckily, no one was hit by a bullet or debris of the initial shot. He released 2 rows of students and the teacher before settling in for a standoff. The woman that initially told everyone in the teacher's lounge about the shooting had been the teacher released from the classroom. Over the next few hours, students were released for small requests like cigarettes, soft drinks, and pizza. Multiple shots were fired throughout the ordeal, but thankfully no one was injured or killed. The shooter was later identified as a 17-year-old student at the high school, advised police that he would surrender if he could see his father. He told police that he hadn't seen his father since he was 4 years old. Around 5 p.m. that day, the last hostage was released. The Kentucky State Police eventually negotiated his surrender before his father could arrive from Florida. While most people never know the reason behind such an insane act of violence, upon questioning, the shooter referred to the Stephen King book Rage as his inspiration for the shooting. Crazy enough, my dad didn't think the student served any prison time. It was his belief that while the boy was initially taken to jail after surrendering, he was never tried and was instead released out of the county and told to never return. I guess 1989 was a different time. My dad says that word had quickly spread after the takeover, and that many parents had arrived to the scene and were looking for their children. One of them asked my father where his son was, and my dad wasn't for sure, and that's what he told the parent. However, he had been too afraid to tell him that he thought he was currently being held hostage. It turns out he was. Many of the students held hostage suffered from PTSD and had to undergo counseling for many years. Fortunately, no one was physically harmed, though. Once my parents were finally released from the scene, they had driven straight to my babysitters to pick me up. Being less than a year old, I was oblivious to the chaos that my parents had experienced that day. They say when they saw me, they picked me up and prayed that the little girl would never have to experience anything like that. This story isn't very long at all, but it's the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. It was my senior year of high school, and pretty late in the school year. I think it was March, maybe even February. Anyways, I had just got to school. It was before class had even started, so I was just sitting in the commons with my friend. I remember hearing an announcement over the intercom, but I am hard of hearing, so I didn't really understand it at all. I figured it was something unimportant, because it always is, so I go back to talking. My friends didn't understand the announcement either, so we just kept talking. Everyone started shuffling around, and I got kind of confused. Did the bell ring? No, it was only 7:35. We had 5 more minutes. When the ladies from the office came and told us to hurry into a classroom, I realized things were weird. I asked why, and she said just go as she pushed me into the choir room. My friend was already there, and I asked her what was going on. "We're on lockdown, didn't you hear the announcement?" Locks, lights out of sight. My heart dropped. Lockdown? I was scared. I thought I was going to die, or worse, one of my friends. Then I saw another friend crying. I went to comfort her and she said she couldn't find her boyfriend before she got pushed in here, and he isn't texting back, and so she was worried. I sat down and started to cry myself. I texted my mom to let her know what was going on, and then I turned my phone on, do not disturb, and sat in the dark, quiet room. A few minutes go by and I hear footsteps outside. My heart is beating out of my chest and tears are rolling down my face. By now it's probably 9 a.m., and we've been stuck in here for about an hour. The door opens and I brace myself, and thankfully it is the principal. He's there to tell us everything is okay and we can go back to class. No one got hurt and it was all okay. It might seem uneventful, but knowing that there was an active shooter for a short time really creeped me out. I was never able to find too much information about what the shooter did, if he actually shot a gun or anything, but essentially, a kid came to school with a backpack full of weapons and was threatening some seriously bad stuff. Before I begin my story, I'll give you a quick summary of the location where this happened. At my middle school, in the older half of the building, built in the 1950s at some point, all the classrooms have little windows next to them. My reason for bringing this up is a horrifying event that took place during my 5th hour class today, involving one of these said windows. I walked into the classroom and set my stuff down, preparing to ask the boy next to me, named Cameron, if he had a pencil I could borrow. As I was about to ask this, I heard a loud smacking sound followed by a crunch, following by a shattering type noise, sort of like when you drop a box of pencils or markers. All of a sudden I was deafened by screams of shock and agony. My classmates were now in the hall, shocked by something just barely out of my line of sight. I walked into the hallway. Being the shorter end of my height spectrum, I had to shove my way to the front of the group. What I saw next will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. I saw a girl rolling around on the floor, smearing blood on the dirty linoleum tiles. At first I couldn't tell what had happened, but before I got the picture after a few seconds, the girl was a special needs student. After being rejected by a boy in her class, she went completely ballistic, and without thinking, he punched one of the windows next to a neighboring classroom door. There were several broken shards of glass and blood everywhere. Thankfully, the classroom next to ours was vacant, and nobody was in there at the time of the incident. After about 10 minutes, teachers got the situation calmed down. The girl was completely crazy and tried to fight the man who came to help her. The school ended up going into a lockdown. She had to go to the hospital, and even though nobody really knew her, she was in 7th grade and we were in 8th, we were all in legitimate shock by the horrible scene. I really hope she's getting the help that she needs, and I hope that she still doesn't have a fistful of glass shards. I've seen some crazy stuff at my school, but that might have been the most messed up thing I've ever seen there. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true lockdown horror stories. I know I don't normally cover these kind of topics, but I felt since we're all kind of in a lockdown still as it is, I know a lot of states are opening now, but the past 3 months have been pretty much like a lockdown, that I would cover some stories like this. I hope you guys enjoyed them, and if you did, please hit that like button as it really does help me out a ton. The more likes these videos gets, the more YouTube promotes it to subscribers and to fresh new faces. If you are one of those fresh new faces, why not join the swamp? Hit that subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them all the time, on all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story that you would like to share and hear in a future video, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help this channel keep going. If you don't know already, you can bring your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories with you wherever you go. You can download them on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and pretty much everywhere else you listen to podcasts online. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting these videos. If you can, comment down below letting me know what you thought of these stories. Which one was your favorite? And give me some suggestions for future videos. I'd love to know what you would like to see. Thank you as always for supporting the swamp and for helping me during these hard times. I know I've been uploading a little bit less, and I really do apologize for that, but I hope ultimately it will be for the greater good of my mental health. I really don't want to get burned out and end up hating YouTube, you know? But again, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.